You gave too much. But no one called it a problem. They called it strength. They called you reliable. They said you were steady, calm, always there when needed. They didn't see you falling apart. Didn't see how many times you showed up with nothing left inside. How many times you nodded yes when every part of you wanted to say no. Was motion. You weren't trying to be a hero. You were just trying not to let anyone down. They applauded when you stayed, praised your patience, your maturity, your composure. But they never asked, was the weight too much for you? They saw you smile and thought you were fine. Saw your silence and assumed you needed nothing. Saw you carry it all and asked for more. You didn't complain, didn't walk away, didn't explode. You just disappeared. No noisy, no drama. Just step by step. Ach not. Ach passing day. You faded behind your own effort until one day you looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the person staring back. And still, no one noticed. No one asked, because the man who gives the most is often the last to be cared for. And that's when everything begins to change. You were always the one to text first. Not because you had nothing else to do, but because you cared. You checked in first, not because you didn't have your own problems, but because you didn't want anyone to feel abandoned the way you once did. You made the plans, the hangouts, the calls, the meetups. You remembered the anniversaries others forgot. You held on to the little details they only mentioned once in passing. You did it all. Not because you expected something, but because you believed that if you were kind enough, genuine enough, consistent enough, they would stay. You believed love was something held together by patience, by quietly showing up, by not leaving, even when you had every reason to. But you started to realize everything you did was slowly no longer appreciated. The things that once made them value, you now became the things they expected. They didn't ask if you were tired, didn't notice when you were quieter than usual, didn't see you were trying to hold together something. Only you were still holding. Your care turned into obligation. Your presence became routine. They didn't walk away, but they didn't move closer either. They kept you around as a convenient option. You became the chair in the corner of the room, always there, always steady, but no one really looked anymore. You didn't ask for much, didn't complain. You still did everything the same. But inside, you started to grow tired, started to wonder, am I really important or just the easiest one to reach when they need something? And then you realized, effort doesn't guarantee appreciation. Loyalty doesn't guarantee love. You can give your whole heart and still not be enough. You can stay, and they still won't choose you. And that realization is the beginning of your quiet withdrawal. Silent, but very real. You didn't scream. You didn't break things. You didn't leave behind words of blame. You didn't disappear in a burst of anger. You just stopped. Not all at once, but gradually, like someone barefoot stepping away from the cold. Quietly, without leaving a trace. You stopped reaching out first. They called it being busy. You stopped checking in like before. They thought you were becoming distant. You stopped making plans ahead of time, and they simply assumed you just needed space. No one paused to ask why you'd changed, because no one ever really noticed. When you were giving, they received. When you began to grow silent, they turned away, not because they were cruel, but because they never understood your presence was a choice, not an obligation. You were still there, but no longer the one holding things together. You still listened, but no longer tried to fix it. You were still polite, but no longer bending. And in every small action, you were pulling back, not for pity, but to breathe. Slowly, you became a shadow, present, but fading. People looked right through you, not knowing what they were missing. No one noticed you were shrinking back, piece by piece. No one realized you were withdrawing your energy from the relationships you once carried on both shoulders. You didn't leave. You didn't say goodbye. You just stopped pouring into a cup that had long since cracked. You didn't leave chaos behind, but you knew something had broken. Silently, completely, beyond repair. And the thing that keeps you the quietest is not that you have nothing left to say. It's knowing that no matter how much you say, to those who won't listen, it will always echo back like a voice in an empty room. You didn't retreat out of weakness. You pulled back because, finally, you saw clearly. And this time, you didn't need to scream for them to understand. You were tired. You just needed to stop and let the silence speak for you. It was a perfectly ordinary morning. Nothing big happened. No breaking point. Just a ray of sunlight falling across the floor. A cup of coffee cooling faster than usual. And in one very quiet moment, you realized you didn't want to keep trying anymore. You didn't want to be the one to reach out first. Didn't want to send, "Are you okay?" when you knew there'd be no question in return. Didn't want to smile politely in gatherings, where your presence was just background for someone else to talk about themselves. The exhaustion wasn't a wave anymore. It was a still body of water. No anger, no expectation, just a deep sigh, pulling you back to a question you'd avoided for a long time. If you disappeared, would anyone really notice? So you started to test it. You stopped reaching out, stopped making plans, stopped checking who might need you, stopped reminding anyone of anything. You didn't shut the door. You just stopped opening it. And then you waited to see who would knock. But no one did. No one asked why you'd gone quiet. No one wondered about the space you left behind. At first, it stung. But then, the feeling softened. Because their indifference no longer hurt the way it used to. It became clear proof. You weren't loved for who you were, but for what you could do for them. You thought you mattered, but it turned out you were just convenient. You thought you were appreciated, but it turned out you were just used. And that realization, quiet, unnoticed, was the turning point. Not because you were angry with them, but because you were done hiding yourself, just to stay. That day, you didn't walk away. You simply chose something different. You chose yourself. Not out of pride, but because you finally understood. If you don't stand for yourself, no one else will do it for you. And from that moment on, everything began to shift. Not around you, but within you. The first quiet days weren't comforting. They didn't bring the relief you thought they would. They were empty, cold, like cutting off an old habit. You didn't realize you were addicted to validation. You were used to being needed, waited for, praised, even blamed. And suddenly, there was no one, no more message notifications, no more invitations, no one waiting on your reply. You sat in a room with no noise, no footsteps, just you, alone with yourself. But you didn't turn back. You didn't try to fill the space. You let it be. You didn't call anyone. Didn't try to explain. Didn't try to tell anyone what you were going through. You just stayed. In the silence, in the emptiness, in the unfamiliar feeling of having no one but yourself. Then one morning, you made coffee slowly. Not in a rush. Not to get somewhere on time. Just because you wanted to feel the warmth in the air. You opened an old book. Not for knowledge, but because you missed the feeling of reading without distractions. You cooked for yourself, not because you had to, but because you wanted to create something just for you to enjoy. You began choosing presents, not for anyone else, but for yourself. There was no applause, no one confirming you were doing the right thing. But real healing never begins with applause. It begins with silence. A silence that no longer felt scary. A silence that started to feel like home. And little by little, you felt your body grow lighter, your heartbeat slower, no one pulling you elsewhere, nothing left to prove. And in that stillness, you began to remember who you were, before the world made you forget. Someone who didn't need validation to feel enough. Someone who lived, not to please, but to truly live. You started living by principles no one ever taught you. They weren't written down. They had no name, but they were as clear as breath. You no longer responded immediately to every message. No longer felt the need to explain right away. No longer feared being misunderstood so much that you rushed to clarify. Because now you understand the one who doesn't want to understand will only drift further the more you speak. You stopped explaining your boundaries to those who crossed them without hesitation. Stopped forcing yourself to be polite with those who only aim to drain you. You no longer felt guilty for declining meetups that held no meaning. No longer felt obligated to maintain connections just because it's been a long time. End quote. No longer tried to keep the peace when inside. You were exploding from being disrespected. You don't need to stand out. You just need to be clear. You no longer need validation. You just need peace. You now know that silence is power. Slowness is a choice, and distance is a gift, not a punishment. Not everyone is still with you. But those who remain are the ones who don't need you to exhaust yourself to keep them. They don't drain you with their presence. They don't make you question your worth. They don't require you to change just to fit their needs. They don't test you with silence, coldness, or emotional games. You no longer hold on to people who make you perform. You no longer keep those who cost you your sleep, your ease, or your self-respect. You no longer step aside for those who take your kindness for granted. Now, you no longer prove your worth. You protect it, not by fighting but by choosing carefully. And if something costs you your inner stillness, no matter how beautiful it is, you let it go. Not because you fear being hurt, but because, finally, you understand what should never be hurt again. Society doesn't know what to do with a man who doesn't need anyone to feel enough. They're not used to quiet without fear behind it. Not used to eyes that aren't searching for approval. Not used to someone who doesn't react on cue. Praise brings joy. Silence brings worry. Distance brings doubt. You're no longer easily controlled. And that confuses them. They start calling you cold. They say you've become distant. They use words like closed off, as if it's your fault for no longer smiling too easily or saying what's convenient. They don't understand that this change isn't because you look down on the world, but because you've learned not to let it own you. You used to be led by compliments, obsessed with how others saw you, twisted by the pressure to always be the good guy. But now, you're not stirred by praise, not shaken by silence, not trapped by disapproving glances. You no longer need affection to feel worthy. You no longer feel the need to fix yourself every time someone is displeased. You're not angry. You don't retaliate. You simply step back, see things more clearly in silence. And that's what makes you intimidating to those who manipulate through emotion, because they can't move someone who no longer seeks their approval. You're no longer the man who stays no matter what. You're the man who knows when it's time to walk away. Not loudly, not bitterly, just enough. You're no longer afraid of being alone. What you fear now is losing yourself again. Because you know that feeling when you strained to hold on to someone and dropped parts of yourself along the way. And once you've found those parts again, you'll never let them go. Not for anyone. Not for anything. Outsiders look in and call your current life lonely. They see the quiet house, the table set for one, to the evenings without someone waiting or texting to check in. They think you're missing something. They think you're enduring. But they don't know what you're living isn't lack. It's selection, not emptiness, but fullness, in a way they've never understood. Loneliness is lying next to someone and still feeling alone. It's speaking your truth and receiving only indifference. It's being tired and having to hide it. Because the person beside you doesn't know how to listen without judgment. Loneliness isn't about how many people are around. It's about not being truly seen by anyone. But now in this stillness you get to be yourself. You don't have to be cheerful all the time. You don't have to reply to messages right away. You don't have to pretend to agree just to keep the peace. You can be quiet without guilt. Be tired without performing. Say no without explaining. Your morning starts slow. No one rushing you. No one judging you. Just you. The soft light filling the room. And a steady breath you no longer have to hold in. Your nights aren't loud. No waiting. No disappointment. Just you and the calm you fought so hard to protect. Others might call this loneliness. But to you, it's freedom. No more roles to play. No more chasing. No more doing more, just to be loved less. For the first time in decades, you're no longer sitting around waiting for someone to come and see your worth. Because finally, you've seen it for yourself, not in someone else's eyes, but in the stillness you chose. And that is enough. No one needs to prove it. No one needs to confirm it. Just you. And the peace you'll never trade again. You haven't closed your heart to love. You haven't rejected connection. You haven't denied the longing for companionship. But you've changed. You no longer crave someone to fill the emptiness. You no longer seek a love that survives only through sacrifice. If love asks you to shrink, if it requires you to stay silent about what matters, if it costs you the peace you spent years building, then no matter how deep it runs, you will walk away. You're no longer willing to repeat the cycle, giving everything, waiting in quiet desperation, and eventually picking up the pieces of yourself. Once was a lesson. Twice was awakening. You once lost yourself trying to hold on to someone, but this time, you're holding on to you. Not because you're afraid of love, but because you refuse to pay the price of the wrong one. You now know that love isn't about trading pieces of yourself. Love isn't endurance. Love isn't slowly losing your identity to keep someone from leaving. If she comes, she must come with respect, with clarity, with her true self, and with the willingness to walk beside you, not pull you off your path. You no longer rewrite your story to fit someone else's. You don't edit yourself to be chosen. You don't slow your pace just to match someone who was never really walking with you. You understand now, the right person will never lead you away from yourself, and anyone who makes you choose between them and your peace was never meant to stay. You can walk alone, but every step is steady. No more confusion. No more chasing. No more needing to be saved, because you've already saved yourself. And from now on, even if you walk the quietest road, you'll still know exactly who you are, where you're going, and why you're not turning back. You can walk alone, but you'll never lose your way again.